My sister said I should give you this. The voice was small but it did not shake. Renzo Juan did not look up immediately. He had learned, over many years, that sudden reactions could cost more than silence. In a city like North Calder Bay, hesitation was safer than curiosity. So he stayed still for a moment, his hand resting beside a black ceramic cup of tea that had already begun to lose its heat. Then he lifted his eyes. A little girl stood beside his table. She was no more than 4 years old. Her jacket was bright yellow, shaped in a way that did not belong in a city known for its cold tones and distant faces. One of her pigtails had loosened slightly, and she held a folded piece of paper in her small hand, stretching it toward him with quiet certainty. No fear. No hesitation. Just purpose. Renzo studied her for a second. Not because she was a threat, but because she wasn't. Who told you to bring this? He asked. The girl blinked once, then answered simply. My sister. That was all. No extra words. No explanation. Renzo reached for the note. He told himself it was nothing. Just a child passing a message. Something small. Something that did not matter. But the way the paper had been folded, clean, careful, deliberate, said otherwise. He opened it slowly. I know this is strange. My sisters have something at school tomorrow. Everyone is bringing someone. We don't have anyone to come. You don't have to talk. You don't have to stay long. Just sit with us for a little while. So they won't feel different. If you can't, please ignore this. Renzo read it once. Then again. Nothing around him had changed. The diner was still quiet. A man at the counter flipped through a newspaper. A waitress moved between tables with steady steps. Outside, cars passed by like they always did, each one carrying people who did not know or care who he was. But something shifted. Not in the room. Inside him. He folded the paper again, slower this time. When he looked up, the little girl was still there, watching him as if she expected something, but not demanding it. Where is your sister? He asked. She turned and pointed across the diner. That was when he saw them. 3 girls sat at a booth near the window. The oldest sat upright, her hands placed carefully on the table. She was trying to look calm, but there was something in her posture that revealed effort, the kind that didn't belong to a child. The middle one leaned slightly forward, her eyes narrowed. She was watching him closely, not with curiosity but with caution, like she was trying to decide if he was safe or not. And the smallest one, this one, had already decided. Renzo's gaze settled on the oldest. She did not look away. There was no fear in her expression. Only a quiet question. Was it worth it? That was what her eyes seemed to ask. Was the risk she had taken worth the outcome she was waiting for? Renzo held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he looked back down at the note in his hand. A simple request. No begging. No pressure. No expectation. Just presence. I'll think about it, he said. The little girl nodded as if that answer was enough. Then she turned and walked back to her sisters. Renzo watched her this time. Not because he needed to, but because something about the way she walked, so sure and unafraid, did not match the world he knew. He picked up his cup and took a small sip of the tea. It had cooled. He didn't finish it. Renzo Juan was not a man who accepted invitations. Especially not from strangers. And never from children. In North Calder Bay, his name carried weight that most people only understood when it was too late. He led the Crimson Scorpion, an organization that did not move loudly, but never moved without purpose. Decisions were made carefully. Actions were precise. Mistakes were not repeated. For years he had lived by a simple rule. Distance. From people. From attachment. From anything that could become a weakness. That was why he chose places like this diner. It was quiet. Unremarkable. Predictable. No one asked questions. No one paid attention. The woman who worked there, Rosa Vargas, moved with a kind of efficiency that matched the place. She did her job without unnecessary conversation. She brought his tea the same way every time. No spills. No hesitation. He had never asked her name. And she had never asked his. That was how he preferred it. Clean. Simple. Controlled. But today something had shifted. Not because of Rosa. Not because of the diner. Because of a folded piece of paper now resting beside his cup. Renzo picked it up again. He looked at the handwriting. Careful. Straight. Thought out. The kind of writing that came from someone trying to do things properly, even when no one was watching. He slipped the note into his coat. That was the part that mattered. He could have left it on the table. He could have thrown it away. He had done that before, with things far more important. But he didn't. When he stood to leave, the chair moved softly against the floor. No one in the diner reacted. They never did. Renzo adjusted his coat and walked toward the door. As he passed the counter, Rosa placed a fresh cup down for another customer. Her movements were steady, controlled. For a brief second, her eyes lifted toward him, not with curiosity, not with recognition, but with the same quiet awareness she always carried. Then she looked away. Renzo stepped outside. The air in North Calder Bay was colder than it had been earlier, the kind of cold that settled into the skin and stayed there. He reached into his coat pocket. The note was still there. He felt the edge of it between his fingers. He did not take it out. He did not need to. He knew what it said. He knew what it meant. And more importantly, he knew what it had done. Renzo Juan had ignored threats, deals, and men far more dangerous than a child's request. But for the first time in years, he didn't ignore this. The next morning came with a strange kind of stillness. It was not peace. It was the kind of quiet that sat on the chest and refused to move. The kind that made time feel slower than it really was. In the small apartment above the bakery on Mercer Street, 3 sisters moved through their morning in different ways. The youngest, Sophie, woke up believing. That was the simplest way to describe it. She believed the way only a 4-year-old could, completely, without caution, without the need for proof. She sat on the edge of her bed while Rosa buttoned her cardigan, swinging her legs and asking if she should save the chair beside her. Rosa paused for only a second. Save it for who? She asked carefully. Sophie smiled as if the answer should have been obvious. For him. Rosa did not ask who. She already knew. She smoothed Sophie's hair back gently and said nothing. Some questions only made hope louder, and Rosa had spent too many years learning how dangerous hope could be when it settled in children. At the kitchen table, the oldest girl, Lily, was already dressed. Her school sweater was buttoned straight. Her shoes were tied neatly. Her lunch card was in the front pocket of her bag, exactly where it belonged. Everything about her looked prepared. Everything except her eyes. They kept drifting toward the clock. She had written the note. She had sent Sophie to deliver it. She had watched Renzo Juan read it and say only 4 words. I'll think about it. That should have been enough to tell her nothing. But it wasn't. The middle girl, Chloe, sat beside the window, pulling at the edge of her sleeve. Unlike Sophie, she did not believe in things just because she wanted to. She had spent too much time noticing what adults avoided saying. She understood disappointment better than most children her age should. He's not coming, Chloe said flatly. Sophie turned toward her at once. He might. He won't. You don't know that. Chloe shrugged, but it was the kind of shrug that tried to hide feeling and failed. I know people don't just show up because you ask them to. Lily looked at her younger sister but said nothing. Rosa, standing near the stove, kept stirring oatmeal in a pot that did not need that much stirring. No one mentioned the note again. No one mentioned the man from the diner. But his absence had already made a place for itself in the room. By 10:15 the girls were dressed, fed, and ready. The school event was called Guest Table Day. That was what made it harder. If it had been something strictly for fathers, there would have been an explanation. A line to hide behind. A reason for not participating. But Guest Table Day was wider than that. Softer. More open. Bring someone important, the paper had said. A parent. A guardian. A grandparent. An older sibling. A family friend. Someone who shows up for you. That last line had stayed with Lily longer than she wanted to admit. Because showing up was the whole thing. At school, room 12 had been decorated with paper flowers, colored stars, and hand-cut cards hanging from string across the back wall. Small tables had been arranged in neat rows. Juice boxes sat beside paper napkins. Plates of sandwiches were covered with clear wrap. A board near the teacher's desk read, "Welcome to Guest Table Day," in bright uneven letters. Children entered the room with voices full of energy. Some held hands with adults. Some came in groups already laughing. A grandfather with silver glasses sat near the back. A woman in hospital scrubs smiled as she helped her niece settle in. A teenage brother slouched in a chair while his little sister proudly introduced him to everyone around them. The room filled with presents. And with every passing minute, the empty chair at Lily's table became harder to ignore. Sophie sat closest to it. She kept turning toward the door every time it opened. Every single time. At first she smiled each time. Then less. Chloe sat stiffly, arms folded. She watched other children talk to their guests and looked away quickly whenever anyone looked back. There was no anger in her face. Only that hard little stillness children wear when they are trying not to be embarrassed in public. Lily kept her hands folded in her lap. She had promised herself she would stay calm. She had promised herself she would not let Sophie cry if no one came. She had promised herself that if the chair stayed empty, she would make the day feel normal somehow. But as the room settled and voices softened into smaller conversations, she could feel the truth building around them. They were one chair short. Sophie leaned toward her. "Maybe he got lost," she whispered. Lily forced a small smile. "Maybe." Chloe let out a breath through her nose. "Men like that don't get lost." Lily shot her a quick look. Not because Chloe was wrong, but because Sophie was still young enough to need softer explanations. At the front of the room, the teacher clapped her hands gently and welcomed everyone. Children began opening the cards they had made. Some laughed. Some read them out loud. Some leaned against the adults beside them with the easy closeness of people who had done this many times before. At Lily's table, the empty chair remained untouched. Sophie's smile had faded now. Not completely. But enough. Lily's throat tightened. She hated this part. Not pain itself. Pain had been around too long to surprise her. What she hated was the moment just before children understood something they had tried not to believe. That soft breaking point where hope was still alive, but only barely. Then the classroom door opened. It did not swing wide. It did not make a scene. It simply opened. And Renzo Juan stepped inside. He wore a dark coat over a black shirt, the kind of clothes that made him look out of place in a room filled with crayons and paper centerpieces. His presence did not belong among juice boxes and cut-out stars. But he was there. For 1 second, no one at the table moved. Then Sophie gasped, pushed back her chair and ran. Not with hesitation. Not as if she feared she had imagined him. She ran straight toward him with complete certainty, as if the whole morning had only been a delay before something she already knew would happen. Renzo stopped just inside the doorway. Sophie reached him first and wrapped both arms around his leg. Children in nearby seats turned to look. A few adults lifted their heads. The teacher paused in the middle of a sentence. Renzo looked down. Then, very carefully, he placed one hand on Sophie's shoulder, not natural, not practiced, but gentle enough to matter. At the table, Chloe stared. Lily did not move right away. She only looked at him as if she needed to make sure he was real before allowing herself to react. He lifted his eyes and met hers. Then he walked over. There was no dramatic greeting. No explanation. No smile meant to soften the moment. He simply came to the table and stood beside the empty chair. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. Lily shook her head once. "No." He sat down. Something in the air changed immediately. Not loudly. Not magically. But enough. Sophie climbed back into her chair, glowing with satisfaction. Chloe looked at him with narrowed eyes, like she still didn't fully trust what she was seeing. Lily kept her hands in her lap because if she moved them too much, she might reveal how badly they were shaking. The first few minutes were awkward. Sophie pushed a juice box toward Renzo as if that solved everything. Chloe asked if he even liked school food. He looked at the sandwich on his plate and said, "I've had worse." That made Sophie laugh. Then Mia. No, there was no Mia now, only the 3 girls before him. Sophie showed him her paper flower. Chloe pointed out that her card had the straightest lines because she had used a ruler. Lily finally handed him the card she had made for guest day, though she did it without looking directly at him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple drawing of a table with 4 chairs. Not 5. 4. 3 on one side. 1 on the other. He looked at it for longer than he expected to. Then he placed it back on the table without a comment, but not carelessly. That was enough. Little by little, the girls began speaking more freely. Sophie told him which sandwich triangles were better. Chloe asked if he was always late on purpose. He answered, "Usually." That got another laugh. And Lily, quiet, composed Lily, began to relax just enough for her shoulders to lower. At the front of the room, the teacher smiled and moved from table to table, asking each child to introduce their guest. When she reached theirs, she paused kindly. "And who did you bring today?" she asked. Lily looked at Renzo. Then at her sisters. Then back at the teacher. Her answer came softly, but it carried. Someone who came. Rosa Vargas did not arrive at the school in panic. She arrived in control. That was what made the moment sharper. Most people would have rushed in with too much noise, too many questions, too much fear showing on their face. Rosa did none of that. She stepped into the hallway outside room 12 with her apron still tied at the waist, her dark hair pulled back, her breathing even enough to hide how fast she had clearly moved to get there. Someone from the school office had called the diner. That was all it had taken. Now she stood at the classroom door and looked inside. Her eyes moved across the room once. First to her daughters. Lily was seated straight but calmer now. Chloe was still guarded, though not tense in the same way as before. Sophie looked far too happy for Rosa's comfort. Then Rosa's eyes settled on the man seated in the chair that should have remained empty. Renzo Juan. He did not belong in a room like this. Everything about him said so. The black shirt, the controlled posture, the face that seemed built for colder places than this one. Even sitting at a child-sized table under paper decorations, he did not look softened by the setting. He only looked like a dangerous thing placed somewhere it did not naturally belong. Rosa did not let any of that show on her face. She opened the classroom door quietly and stepped inside. The teacher noticed her and smiled, thinking she was simply another parent arriving late. Rosa returned a polite nod, then moved toward the table where her daughters sat. Lily looked up first. Guilt appeared in her face before any words did. That told Rosa enough. So it had been Lily. Of course it had. Rosa stopped beside the table and placed one hand lightly on the back of Sophie's chair. "You three," she said softly, "finish your drinks." Her voice was calm. Too calm. Sophie looked between her mother and Renzo, sensing change without understanding it. Chloe lowered her eyes. Lily held herself still with the particular effort of a child preparing to face consequences. Then Rosa turned to Renzo. "May I speak with you?" It was not rude. It was not warm either. Renzo rose from his chair without argument. He followed her into the hallway. The classroom door closed behind them, muting the soft sounds of children and paper and small laughter. The hallway felt different. Colder. More honest. Rosa crossed her arms and faced him fully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked the simplest question first. "Why are you here?" Renzo looked at her, unreadable as ever. "Your daughter asked." "I know she asked," Rosa said. "That is not what I asked you." Her voice remained even, but there was steel underneath it now. Not fear. Not gratitude. Something harder to navigate than both. "You could have said no," she continued. "You could have ignored the note. You could have done what men usually do when children ask for something inconvenient." Renzo said nothing. Rosa studied him for a second, then shook her head lightly. "My girls do not know your world," she said. "They only know you are the quiet man from the diner who drinks tea and never smiles. But children are not careful with trust. They hand it over before they understand what it costs." That landed. Not because she raised her voice. Because she didn't. Renzo looked past her for a brief moment, toward the painted cinderblock wall, then back at her. "I did not come here to confuse them," he said. "Then why did you come?" This time the question stayed between them longer. Rosa did not rush him. She simply waited. She had the kind of patience that did not come from comfort. It came from raising children alone, from working long shifts, from swallowing hard things because there was no one else to do it. Renzo recognized that kind of patience. It usually belonged to people who had carried too much for too long. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "There was a child," he said. Rosa did not move. "She was mine." The hallway seemed to still around those words. Renzo's expression barely changed, but something in his voice had shifted. Not broken. Just thinned. As if he were stepping onto ground he had not touched in years. "She lived long enough for me to know what her hands looked like," he said. "Long enough for me to think there would be time." Rosa's arms slowly loosened where they were folded. He continued without drama, without trying to make the pain larger than it already was. "She died before I learned how to be anything she could remember. That was all. No details. No names. No attempt to turn grief into explanation. But it was enough." Rosa's face changed in a way so slight that another person might have missed it. The tension did not vanish, but it shifted. Less sharp now. More human. "I'm sorry," she said. Renzo gave the smallest shake of his head. "It was years ago. That doesn't mean it stopped being real." For the first time since stepping into the hallway, he looked at her properly. Not as the waitress from the diner. Not as the mother of 3 girls who had unexpectedly crossed into his orbit. As a woman who understood something about surviving after loss. Rosa let out a slow breath. "What happened in there," she said, nodding toward the classroom, "made them happy. I'm not going to pretend it didn't." Her eyes held his. "But happiness is not the same thing as safety." Renzo's face remained still. "You think I'm dangerous." "I think men like you leave damage behind them," Rosa answered. There was no cruelty in the words. Just honesty. She looked toward the classroom door for a second, then back at him. "My daughters are not built for your kind of storm. I need you to understand that before anything gets confused." Renzo might have answered. He might have said he understood. He might have said nothing would come of this. But before he could speak, His phone vibrated in his pocket. One short buzz. Then another. He took it out and checked the screen. A message from Reyes. Man in a navy cap asked staff at the diner what time you usually come in. Left before we got there. Another face seen near the school gate 20 minutes ago. Not random. Renzo read it once. Then again. The hallway seemed to narrow around him. Rosa noticed the change at once. What is it? She asked. He put the phone back into his pocket. Nothing for you to worry about right now. That answer did not satisfy her. He could see that immediately. She took one small step closer. If something involves my children, it becomes something for me to worry about. Renzo respected that she did not tremble when she said it. He also respected that she did not waste time pretending she was powerless. There are questions being asked, he said at last. By who? People who pay attention to patterns. Rosa's face hardened. And what pattern have they found? He did not answer right away. Because now that the information was sitting clearly in his mind, the shape of it had changed. A man asking questions at the diner. A second face near the school gate. No direct move. No open threat. Nothing obvious enough to cause panic. Which meant this was not surveillance meant to frighten. It was assessment. Someone was tracing movement. Linking places. Measuring repetition. Rosa watched him, reading what she could from his silence. Is this because of you? She asked. He looked at her. The truthful answer was yes. But not in the simple way the question asked it. He thought of the diner. Of the note. Of himself walking into that classroom and taking the empty seat. Of a city where nothing stayed unnoticed forever. Then he understood it. Not fully. But enough. He had assumed even now that if anyone was paying attention they were tracking him. His routes. His habits. His movements. But that wasn't it. This was smaller than that. Closer. More dangerous. His gaze shifted to the classroom door. Behind it sat 3 girls and a woman who had every reason to keep her life narrow, careful, and ordinary. He turned back to Rosa. They are not watching me, he said quietly. Her brow tightened. Then what are they doing? Renzo's voice dropped even further. They are studying what I returned to. The first sign came from Chloe. Not Lily, who usually carried things too long before speaking. Not Sophie, who would have said it loudly the moment it happened. It was Chloe. That alone told Renzo the matter was serious. She came into the diner later that afternoon while Rosa was in the kitchen and Sophie was busy trying to color a paper napkin with a red crayon that had already gone blunt. Lily had gone to wash her hands. The place was quiet in the way it always became after lunch, but before evening, when even the sound of spoons against ceramic seemed careful not to disturb anything. Chloe stopped beside Renzo's booth. She did not sit down immediately. Her small fingers were tight at her sides, her jaw set in a way that didn't belong on a 7-year-old. Someone talked to me outside school, she said. Renzo looked up from the tea in front of him. What did he say? Chloe glanced toward the kitchen before answering. He asked if my mother always worked here. Then he asked if you came every day. Renzo's face did not change. But something inside him sharpened. Did you answer? She shook her head. I told him I had to go. Did he touch you? No. Did he follow you? I don't think so. That last part mattered. It meant she hadn't panicked. She had paid attention. She had looked without looking the way children sometimes did when survival had taught them to notice adults carefully. Renzo studied her for a second. What did he look like? Tall, Chloe said. Gray jacket. Smelled like cigarettes. He smiled too much. That was enough. Not for the full picture. But enough to begin. You did the right thing, Renzo said. Chloe searched his face. Is it bad? It's finished, he said. That was not yet true. But it would be. Chloe nodded once as if she wanted to believe him and had decided to try. Then she went back to her seat near the window without another word. Renzo did not touch his tea again. He took out his phone and sent one short message to Reyes. Find gray jacket. School perimeter first. Then diner. Quietly. The reply came almost immediately. Already moving. Renzo leaned back in the booth and looked through the window at the fading afternoon outside. Cars passed. People crossed the street carrying groceries, office bags, umbrellas. North Calder Bay continued as if nothing in it had changed. But the line had been crossed now. Not with gunfire. Not with open threat. With a question asked to a child. That was enough. He did not storm out. He did not make a call filled with anger. Men who ruled by noise often died by surprise. Renzo had built Crimson Scorpion by understanding that pressure, when applied correctly, did not need volume. Rosa emerged from the kitchen with a tray balanced on one hand. She moved through the diner the same way she always did, calm, efficient, unreadable from a distance. But when she reached his table, she knew at once that something had changed. "What happened?" she asked softly, not setting the tray down yet. Renzo looked up at her. Chloe was approached outside school. Rosa's grip on the tray tightened so slightly that another man would have missed it. "By who?" "I'm finding out." Her eyes moved at once toward the window booth where the girls sat. Sophie was laughing at something Lily had drawn on the napkin. Chloe was staring down at her hands. Rosa placed the tray down on the counter and came back. "You said this would stop." "It will." "That is not the same as saying it has." There was no fear in her tone now. Fear had burned past its first stage and hardened into anger. Quiet anger. The kind that held itself together because it had no choice. Renzo understood it. "Sit," he said. She hesitated only once before sliding into the seat across from him. The diner sounds continued around them. Somewhere near the counter, a spoon tapped a glass. A man coughed. The radio behind the register hummed low with an old song no one was listening to. Renzo lowered his voice. "There is something they are looking for." Rosa held his gaze. "And what exactly do they think I have?" "That is what I need you to tell me." Her eyes narrowed slightly. He continued. "Think carefully. Anything you saw. Anything you heard. Something you dismissed because it didn't seem important at the time." Rosa looked away, not to avoid him, but to think. At first, her expression remained still. Then it changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Renzo saw the moment memory reached her. "There was a night," she said slowly. "Months ago. After closing." He said nothing. "I was in the back office counting receipts. Two men came in through the side entrance. They thought the place was empty." She frowned faintly, reaching back through the memory. "They were arguing. Not loudly, but the kind of quiet that sounds worse." "About what?" "I didn't hear everything." She paused. "A shipment. A dock number. And a list." Renzo's eyes sharpened. "What list?" "I don't know. One of them said it should have been destroyed. The other said someone had made a copy before the fire." "Fire. That changed the shape of things. Not everything. But enough." "And you never said anything?" Rosa let out a breath through her nose. "To who?" He did not answer. She leaned back slightly, folding her arms. "I have 3 daughters," she said. "I hear strange things all the time in this city. Men arguing outside. Broken bottles in alleys. Names said in low voices. I learned a long time ago that surviving and speaking are not always the same choice." Renzo accepted that without argument. Because she was right. In a city like North Calder Bay, ordinary people often stayed alive by pretending not to notice what passed near them. Still, the pieces were fitting now. A burned shipment record. A copied list. Questions around the diner. Interest near the school. Someone believed Rosa had heard enough to become useful, or dangerous. And because Renzo had stepped too close to her world, that belief had sharpened. His phone vibrated again. Gray jacket identified. Not freelance. Runs errands for Caldero's old dock network. He asked about school schedule this morning. Renzo read the message once and locked the screen. Caldero. That made sense. Not a syndicate war. Not a territory dispute. A cleanup. Someone trying to erase whatever remained connected to a past operation that had not ended as cleanly as they wanted. He stood. Rosa looked up at him. "What now?" "Now," he said, "you and the girls leave with my people." Her face hardened immediately. "No." "Yes. I'm not sending my daughters anywhere with strangers. They won't be strangers for long." "That's not funny." "It wasn't meant to be." Rosa stood too. Across the diner, Lily was watching now. Chloe had turned fully in her seat. Even Sophie had stopped coloring. Rosa lowered her voice further. "You keep deciding things for us. I keep removing options that will get you hurt." Her jaw tightened. For a second, they stood there locked in that hard silence two strong-willed people fell into when neither was used to yielding. Then Renzo said the one thing that mattered. "They asked the child questions today." Rosa went still. He held her eyes. "That means they are running out of patience." Something in her face shifted then. Not surrender. Recognition. She looked toward her daughters again. When she turned back, the fight in her voice had changed shape. "How long?" "1 night. Maybe 2. "And after that?" "After that, they lose interest." She studied him. Not the suit. Not the cold expression. Him. As if she were measuring whether this man truly understood the weight of what he was taking responsibility for. Finally, she gave one small nod. Renzo made 2 calls from the back hallway. The first sent a car. The second closed a circle around the people asking questions. No shouting. No threats. No dramatic orders. Just names confirmed, routes narrowed, access removed. By nightfall, Rosa and the girls were in a townhouse on the north side under another name, watched by people who knew better than to make the children feel like they were being guarded. By midnight, the man in the gray jacket had lost the phone he was using. By 1 in the morning, 2 others discovered that the account paying them no longer existed. By dawn, a dock supervisor who had planned to disappear for a few weeks suddenly decided to stay in town and answer very specific questions from very specific people. Renzo never raised his voice once. He did not need to. He sat in a private room above an empty restaurant and moved pieces across a board no one else could fully see. A call here. A file there. One favor collected. Another debt returned. By the time the sun touched the harbor, the network around Rosa had begun collapsing inward under the weight of its own fear. That was the thing people misunderstood about men like him. Danger was not always the trigger pulled in the dark. Sometimes it was the quiet rearranging of reality until the people standing against you woke up and found that every door they trusted had already been closed. By the second evening, Reyes called. "It's done," he said. Renzo looked out at the city through the glass in front of him. Below, North Calder Bay glittered cold and distant under a veil of rain. He thought of Rosa. Of Lily trying to be older than she was. Of Chloe standing straight while reporting something that should never have touched her life. Of Sophie still young enough to believe adults could fix what frightened children. Then he ended the call. Some wars didn't need gunfire. They ended the moment the right man decided they were over. The city returned to its usual rhythm. That was the first sign everything had been handled. In North Calder Bay, when something truly dangerous ended, there was no announcement. No public shift. No visible change. Life simply continued, and whatever had been out of place disappeared as if it had never been there at all. The gray car that had lingered too long was gone. The unfamiliar faces near the school did not return. No one asked questions anymore. And just like that, the pressure that had quietly settled around Rosa and her daughters lifted. Not suddenly, but enough. Rosa did not speak about it. She did not ask for explanations, and none were offered. She had lived long enough in this city to understand that some problems ended best when left without a story. So she returned to her routine. The diner opened at the same time. The same tables were wiped down in the same order. The same regulars came in with the same habits. The sound of cutlery against ceramic filled the air in that quiet, familiar way that meant nothing had broken. From the outside, it was as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed. Rosa moved through her shift with the same steady rhythm, but there was a new awareness in her eyes. Not fear. Not even tension. Just a quiet recognition that the line between her world and something far more dangerous had been crossed, and then closed again. She did not pretend it hadn't mattered. She simply chose not to carry it further. Late in the afternoon, the door opened. She did not look up immediately. She didn't need to. She had learned the sound of his steps. Renzo Juan walked in without pause. No hesitation. No scanning of the room beyond what habit required. He moved the same way he always had, controlled, deliberate, as if every step had already been decided before it happened. He took his usual seat. Back to the wall. View of the door. Rosa picked up a black ceramic cup and filled it with tea. The better kind this time. She carried it to his table and set it down carefully. No spill. No wasted motion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said quietly, "It's been quiet." Renzo nodded once. "It will stay that way." She looked at him. Not searching. Not questioning. Just measuring the truth of that statement in the way she measured everything else. Then she said the only thing that needed to be said. "Thank you." It was not emotional. It was not drawn out. But it was real. Renzo gave a small nod. That was enough. Rosa turned and went back to the counter. No more words. No expectation of more. That was how they understood each other. Across the diner, the door opened again. 3 small figures stepped inside. Sophie came first. Her yellow jacket was zipped unevenly, one side slightly higher than the other. Her hair was tied into 2 pigtails again, though one was already loosening. She carried a small box of crayons tucked under her arm like something important. Behind her, Chloe entered more carefully, her eyes already scanning the room the way she always did now. Not afraid. Just aware. Lily followed last. Still composed. Still steady. But no longer holding everything quite as tightly as before. Sophie spotted Renzo immediately. She did not hesitate. She walked straight toward his table, climbed onto the seat across from him without asking, and placed her crayons on the table with a quiet sense of purpose. Renzo looked at her, then at the crayons, then back at her. She did not speak right away. She pulled out a piece of paper from the side of the table and picked up a brown crayon. Carefully she began to draw. Renzo watched without interrupting. There was something about the way children focused on small tasks that made the world feel different. Slower. Less guarded. Sophie pressed the crayon down firmly, moving it across the paper in deliberate strokes. First she drew 3 small shapes. Side by side. Close together. Then after a moment she drew another shape. Larger. But separate. She paused and looked at what she had done. Renzo's eyes followed the drawing. He understood it immediately. Not because it was detailed, but because it was simple. 3 small figures. One apart. That was how it had been. That was how it always was. He leaned back slightly in his seat. That's not how it is, he said. Sophie looked up at him. Then she looked back at the drawing. Without arguing. Without asking questions. She picked up the crayon again. And drew a line. A straight line. From the 3 small figures. To the one that had been alone. She lifted the crayon and looked at him again. Now it is, she said. Renzo did not respond immediately. Something in his chest shifted. Not sharply. Not painfully. Just enough to remind him that the part of him he had buried years ago had not disappeared completely. It had only been left untouched. Across the diner, Rosa stood behind the counter, watching. She did not interrupt. She did not call Sophie back. She simply observed. The same way she always had. But differently now. Chloe slid into the seat beside Sophie, glancing briefly at Renzo before looking at the drawing. Lily approached more slowly. She stopped near the table, her eyes moving between Renzo and her youngest sister, as if confirming something she had already begun to believe. Then she sat down. No formal invitation. No announcement. Just a quiet acceptance of what was already happening. Renzo looked at the 3 of them. Then at the drawing again. Then at the empty space beside him. The same place that had once meant distance. Now it felt different. Not filled. But no longer empty. Sophie pushed the paper slightly toward him. As if showing him something that belonged to all of them now. He placed his hand lightly on the table. Close to the drawing. Not covering it. Not claiming it. Just there. For a moment no one spoke. The diner continued around them. The same quiet noise. The same steady rhythm. But at that table something had settled into place. Sophie looked at him again, her expression serious in that way only children could manage when they were completely certain of something. You can sit with us again, if you want. Renzo met her eyes. Then he looked at Lily. Then Chloe. Then back at Sophie. He did not answer right away. Because for the first time in a long time, the decision in front of him was not about power or control or survival. It was about something far quieter. Something far more dangerous in its own way. He reached for his cup. Took a slow sip. Set it back down. And did not stand up. Outside, North Calder Bay moved the way it always did. Cold. Distant. Unchanged. But inside the diner, at a small table near the window, Renzo Juan remained where he was. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. For the first time in years, leaving felt like the wrong decision. So he didn't. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more interesting stories.